Oops, wrong direction. That is Harley behind me. She's enjoying the couches. And she loves being on camera. Every time I film, Harley is always trying to get behind me and get in the shot. She is a camera hog, which is good because she's so cute. All right, let's get started. Today, I really wanted to talk about office politics because I know that people have a lot of questions about navigating office politics. So we're just going to start there and then see what happens and go from there if people have questions. So I get asked this question a lot about how to navigate, excuse me, how to navigate office politics. And I've struggled to just understand what the question actually is because it's usually, not a dialogue that I can have where I can, ask people what it is that they mean. So I have something in my eye. So when I get this question about office politics, my answer is usually stay out of it because when I hear office politics, just being at this point in my career, what I'm experiencing at this level is maybe different from what people are experiencing and asking you about. Because at this level, office politics are a lot of empire building and a lot of leaders like jockeying for position and a lot of really, I have to be honest, like cutthroat politics, basically, in the workplace. And it's really unpleasant. And your best bet if you get caught up in that kind of politics is just to stay out of it. Keep your nose clean. Don't pick sides. Don't make enemies. Like your best bet is to just be everybody's friend and not get involved as much as possible. Because I've definitely seen people ruin their careers by getting involved in other people's politics and getting caught in the backlash. Or, again, it's at such a senior leadership level that if that leader goes down, you're going down with them. So, like I said, I usually say stay out of it, don't pick sides, and I leave it at that. But that's not a good enough answer because I don't think that's the experience everybody's having when it comes to office politics. I don't think that's what everybody's asking about. So I did ask a friend of mine. I was like, what are people struggling with when it comes to office politics? Like, how can I help? How can I give a better answer on this topic? And my friend had some great insights. And so they told me a few different things and it kind of rang some bells for me. So I'm going to start with the first one. So apparently, a lot of people are struggling with favoritism and unfair advantage, like feeling like other people are getting an unfair advantage or are being treated like the favorite in some way. And this is a tough one because I hear a lot of chatter about this, I have to say. So I hear a lot about it from earlier career folks where they're starting out and they're very concerned about how they're perceived and how they're perceived compared to others. And then as you grow in your career, this doesn't go away. Like it just manifests in different ways, right? So it is, I think, a question that impacts people at all different levels. It just looks a little bit different at each level. And the guidance I would give changes based on where you are in your career. So if you're very early career and you're seeing some of this and you're concerned that that favoritism is happening with people at your same level, I'm going to say something similar to what I said earlier, which is just as much as possible, try not to worry about it because it happens. It's a natural part of life and it may seem really unfair. But one of the biggest differences between coming from the education system and going into the workplace is that this is going to sound really harsh, but this is the no nonsense advice everybody always wants from me. But they're not there to take care of you and they're not there to protect your feelings or make sure everybody gets an equal shake. Like that's just not what the corporate world is there for, right, wrong, or indifferent. It's not. And unfortunately, you will see people get favored. But the problem is a couple different ways. So again, the same answer applies, but I am going to dig deep and tell you why that is the right answer, which is that you can be experiencing this favoritism and feeling like other people are favored or getting ahead of you. You don't know all the factors. Like you do not know some or all the information about their performance. and you don't know 100% yet how your own performance is perceived. So let that sink in for a second. Like, you're judging their rightness and being favored over you based on your perception of yourself and your perception of them. And those perceptions may not be accurate. So maybe they're being favored for perfectly valid reasons that you just don't know. One of the biggest lessons that I learned in my career was that if the management layer above me was making certain decisions or behaving in certain ways, as long as I mostly trusted their like moral compass, right, and their core values, I eventually learned, I'm like, yeah, they're privy to a lot of information that I just don't have. So a lot of times their decisions didn't make sense. And as I grew later in my career, I realized, yeah, a lot of times they just know stuff you don't know. And so they make decisions based on what they know and their experience and their life that you haven't been privy to. And that's just okay, right? And it's better if you just accept that there's stuff you don't know all the time. And you can perceive things like, oh, that person leaves early, or, I get my work done faster, like whatever criteria you're using. And this is the second thing about why it's better just to not overthink this one, because, well, I think you should think about it, but I don't think you should get torqued about it. And here's why: because what most people don't understand is that what leadership values and what you value are rarely the same thing. And that is one of the biggest challenges in adjusting to like this corporate office or business life, is that you've been taught to value certain things like work quality, or for me, effectiveness is like a huge thing that I value. And this is a lesson I had to learn the hard way. Like, I would stay up nights crying and I don't understand why things are this way. And eventually I just learned that whatever organization you're in values certain things that they don't say out loud. And whatever managers or leaders you're working with, it's the same thing. They value things that they don't say out loud. And that's hard because we all want the world to be a meritocracy. Meritocracy meaning based on your merit, that's what you get evaluated and judged by and rewarded and awarded based on it, right? And there's this impression that grown up work is a meritocracy, and it isn't. And what's really interesting is, again, there are specific company norms and company values that the company kind of self reinforces about what it cares about through its leadership chain. And then people have their own individual preferences. And again, that is not going to be visible to you either. This is one of those things where there's basically rules you don't know about. And that's super like frustrating, right? And it can seem super unfair. It's my unfair face. But you have to know that's the way it is, because then you know how to work with that. Does that make sense? So whenever I say, hey, the system is this way, I'm not trying to justify it. I'm not trying to defend it. I'm trying to explain it so that you know how to work within that system. And so what you need to do is you need to find out what that leader values. And is that something you can ever deliver? And this takes time, right? Because you can't always go up to some of these leaders or managers and be like, hey, what's important to you? You can sometimes. And especially if you have the personality to carry it off, which I've done this before, but there's certain people where I didn't have that relationship with and I just couldn't ask them. And so this is where you need to learn to hone your observational skills at work. That is one of the things that has gotten me like so far, but also unstuck. Like, there's been times where I've been stuck in my career, in my job. And what got me through that was honing these observational skills so I could learn what is working for these people. So if you're seeing favoritism or unfair advantage, don't take it personally in the sense that it's about you, because it has nothing to do with you. It's 100% about them. And they're frankly giving you a clue about what they care about and value. And so that is actually super helpful, because when you can see that someone is like the favorite, you can ask yourself, what are they doing to be the favorite? And is that something I can learn to do? Maybe it's not, right? Like, there's been times where I knew who the favorite was and I knew what they were doing. And I was like, that is not a thing I can do, or that is not a thing I care to do. And if you're in that situation, then you need to accept that that is the reality, that you won't be favored because you won't do those things. And so by accepting it, what you're saying is, I'm okay proceeding as is and getting what I'm going to get, knowing I'm going to get the mid level evaluations and I'm going to get mid level raises and I may not get promoted until these people are gone or out of my way or whatever. That's accepting it. But you don't actually have to accept it either. You can go somewhere else because not all companies value that same thing. Does that make sense? That's why I keep saying that it varies a little bit by company and somewhat by manager. So your manager might like people who like go to happy hour and you can't or won't for whatever reason. Well, then I'm never going to be the favorite or I'm never going to get ahead as long as I'm working for this manager. So then you look for a different manager or you go to a different company where happy hours are not as much part of the culture. This is where those observational skills, I'm just going to go back to that, are so important because if you don't notice it and if you don't see, well, what is it that they're doing that's working, then you won't know. Because I do hear that a lot. I'm like, oh, they just like the people that go out with them. And I'm like, yeah, they like the people that go out with them and the people they like go out with them. Like it's both things, right? And they like to go out. And so the people that are there when they go out are the people that they like. And it's not as bad as it used to be. I don't know how much I can say on YouTube Live, but I'm going to be really transparent. When I was starting off in my career, and I moved from California to Texas, there was a bit of a good old boys club at the first company I worked at in Texas. And every Friday, all the guys would go to the dollar store. And this wasn't the dollar store, this was a place where the guys would go and spend dollars. I'm just going to leave it at that. And if you weren't part of that, you were left out of a lot of key decisions and conversations that happened at these male only places. I'm so glad I don't work there anymore. And I did not stay there very long. But I'm just saying that that was the reality before these current times. It is so much better now. Or you've heard the jokes about the golf course, right? There's still a little bit of the golf culture in certain pockets. And yes, sales happen on the golf course, deals happen on the golf course, promotions happen on the golf course. I would say that the percentage of that is also much smaller now. And at some companies, that in crowd is a smokers club. At some companies, it's a happy hour group. At some companies, it's, a group of women, frankly, powerful women in the company who go on these girls' trips and they have their group. And I've seen this, by the way, I'm not talking about anybody specific. I've actually seen that multiple times too. And yay for girl power. Like, honestly, like I'm not criticizing. And those clubs don't tend to be as exclusive, I will say. Like those cliques are like, hey, if you want to hang out and you're fun, you're in, right? And they support each other and lift each other up. Not a bad thing. But do you see what all those things have in common, which is they're all socializing together. And so what your gut is, probably saying at first is, right, Gabby, they're the favorite because they're socializing and they pick their favorites to socialize with. And I'm saying it's not as hard to get in that club as you think it is. You just have to know what the club is doing and decide if you're willing to do that. Like, don't take up smoking. I'm just going to say that. Don't do that. But I've been in the smokers club before and I was definitely benefiting from smoking with the leaders. Like I was smoking with the C-suites, right? And that helped me in certain areas. Or, we have account managers who go golfing with the high dollar clients and they're closing deals on the golf course. So just know that the favorites and the getting ahead is a social game most of the time. And you either are or are not willing to play that social game. There have been multiple times in my life, not just the dollar store situation, where whatever it was that people were doing, I was just not interested in participating. I personally don't go to happy hours, and I accepted that there would be a certain, honestly, it just made things harder. It wasn't even impossible. It's almost like privilege, right? Like privilege is a lack of obstacles. And so if you're participating in whatever that social group is or does, you are then privileged. You have less or fewer obstacles. And so You actually don't have to play that game all the time, but it's significantly harder if you don't. So if you are interested in getting promoted and rising and rising, rising, you have to understand what the social game is at the company you work for and what they care about. And it isn't always a social game, and especially now with remote work. So I was with a company or a specific group in a company where we were remote for years and years and years. And that was such a breath of fresh air because you didn't have this constant pressure to play the social game, but it was also a little harder because then you're like, so what's the game now? Because there's always a game. It's not just what they put on paper about their promotions. So I know I've gone on and about promotions because I'm assuming that people who are interested in career advice are trying to progress, but you might be in a situation where like, I can't even think about a promotion right now. I'm just trying not to get effed over. Fair enough. So if you're dealing with that kind of situation where there's like favoritism and it's not even about like I can't get ahead, it's more like I'm always behind. One of the best things to do is, like I said, hone your observational awareness, know what it is they value. It isn't always a social game. Sometimes it's sales. It's some companies, the people who are favored or get ahead are making sales. And at other times, it's innovation. Somebody who comes up with really good ideas is the person who's like getting ahead. Sometimes it's literally just the person who makes the boss's job easier. And it's as simple as that. So, I've had multiple times in my career where, let me just repeat, I was not the favorite. And then I've had times where I was. And I was the favorite because I made my boss look really, really, really good. Like I made that boss a lot of money. And I made that boss's group make a lot of money. And he looked really good. And so I was his favorite because of that. And that's justified. Like that is like the impact. Like I had a significant business impact and I was favored for that business impact, but really the boss was favoring me because I made him look good. Do you see what I'm saying? So a lot of times when it's like the favoritism, it's really about the individual. It's about what your company values. But I'm going to go back to it's what that individual values. And you have to know what that is in order for you to appeal to that. That's the game. And the other thing that we don't talk about as much with favoritism, and this is going to be probably difficult to hear, but at some level, the leaders above you are choosing their successors. And I'd say that happens at more often than not the senior director and above level. And it happens differently below that level, but it still happens. And the issue is, and this is why I'm telling you this, is that they don't run around telling the whole team, I picked John as my favorite because he's my successor. They don't tell you that. But you can know that the person they're favoring is their chosen successor. That's what I'm telling you, is that every leadership level has some form of succession planning because that leader wants to move up. They have to train their replacement. And they're usually going to be training replacements that they think can support them and make them look good in some way, can play the social game well, right? And who they feel are like them. And that's the thing about likability at work is that people tend to like people that they feel like are like them fundamentally in some way, not always superficially, but sometimes even superficially. But more often than not, it's feeling like they have core values in common or feeling like they care about the same things, which is kind of core values, but not always. So you're not going to know that someone is someone's chosen successor, but at the upper leadership level, sometimes they're more open about that. And at the lower leadership level, they don't necessarily use the word succession planning because that is considered to be more of a senior leadership thing. But at the lower levels, if you're working for a lead, he wants to be, a supervisor. If you're working for a supervisor, he wants to be a manager. If you're working for a manager, she wants to be a senior manager. They all want to move up. They all need a replacement. And so a lot of times the favored person is genuinely their chosen replacement. And that might be good or bad for you. So my other tip for this, other than ignore it and other than hone your observational skills so you can figure out why, so you can play the game if you want to, or decide to move on if you hate that particular game they're playing. The other tip is make friends with the favorite. Like, suck up to the favorite if you're not morally opposed to doing that, because they're going to give you a lot of inside information. And then sometimes you could be second in line. That's also a thing that works. And I'm saying this with full sympathy and empathy because there, more often than not, I was not the favorite, right? Like I can be difficult and opinionated and, whatever. And don't worry, I like myself. But I'm just recognizing that some of those things are off putting and I just haven't always been the favorite. And there have been times where I would get frustrated and I would have to do the same self talk that I'm telling you to do. I was not in a leadership role I thought I should be in. And there was an opportunity for that. And someone else was clearly the favorite. That person happened to already be my friend. I didn't have to like suck up to them later. We'd been friends for a very long time. And that person had been considered just ahead of me for a while. And I worked really hard to understand why are they the favorite? And is that something that I care to compete with? And it wasn't something I could compete with, it was personality. Their personality was just a better fit than mine. And that's a good example of the things that are valued by the leaders who are making these decisions aren't the same things you value. Because I could have sat there and gone, I've closed more sales, I've led more clients, I have this experience, or I'm effective at these things. Doesn't matter. That's not what they cared about when they were looking for who was going to fill this leadership role. And it's not to say that every promotion is about favoritism. It isn't. I'm just saying if you're noticing favoritism, I'm suggesting that you go through this thought process to help yourself, right? So that you can know what to do and to help you process it emotionally, but also to know it doesn't have to be personal. Now, knowing someone was favored over me because of personality, I have to admit that's a little tough, but I'd long ago accepted who I am and that wasn't always everybody's cup of tea. And so if you can have that confidence in yourself and if you can build up that confidence like a muscle, it makes it so much easier to be able to evaluate why other people are perceiving you a certain way or not. So, thank you for listening to the part about favoritism and unfair advantage when it comes to office politics. If anybody has a question, this would be a great time to put it in chat. It doesn't have to be about favoritism, but I'm just going through some topics around office politics because I know a lot of people struggle with that. But I'm happy to take any kinds of questions from anybody who's watching right now. Just pop them into chat. Otherwise, I'll go on to the next topic around office politics. And later, I'm talking a little bit more about leaders because what's been on my mind recently is why and how our leaders are failing us, because I think there's a real issue with senior leaders today. So stay tuned for that, or ask me to pivot to that if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going with office politics if we don't get any questions. All right. So the next one is about competition and backstabbing. And this is another one where it does happen at every level. It's just less obvious at certain levels or at certain companies. But I do have to say that if there is overt competition and backstabbing where you're working, this is a huge red flag when it comes to toxic culture. I have worked at a number of companies and I as a consultant have worked with a significant number of client companies. And I have to say, this isn't one of those things that always has to be true. Competition and backstabbing doesn't have to be part of the work culture. And so if you are experiencing a high level of that, I'm going to say that that is a sign of a toxic workplace and you can't change it. You can't change the culture of where you work, unfortunately. So if you see that, I'm going to say, yes, that is a red flag. And that is a sign that you should move on to somewhere else. If it's overt, if it's obvious, and if you see it happening, not just with you. And so there's a lot of times where like, we see competition and backstabbing through the lens of ourselves. Is someone doing that with me? So what I'm saying is take that and look a little bit more broadly and say, is this happening more widespread? And if it is, like I said, you can't fight that and you need to move on. Now, if it's just you, like if you look around and you're like, it's me, why does this keep happening to me? Because sometimes that happens, right? Then my biggest advice is to actually try and connect with that other person. meaning try to understand where they're coming from because sometimes we're interpreting competition or we're interpreting things as competition and backstabbing when maybe that's I'm just going to say maybe that's just their personality and their work style. And I am going to say this with an empathetic lens because I don't compete or backstab. Like, I only compete with myself. But I do have high standards, and there have been times where people may have interpreted my behavior differently than I felt like I was behaving. Does that make sense? And so there's times where I might be really aggressive about something, and, "Can you do this?" And, "This is happening over here." And again, I'm not feeling competitive or backstabbing, but the end goal is important to me, and I can be really aggressive about getting to that goal. And anybody who is struggling with that, when they come to me and they're like, Abby, you're like really intense about this, it's really stressing me out or something, then we can have a great open conversation about it. So what I'm saying is that if you're experiencing competition of backstabbing, just take a breath and a moment to try and look at that a little bit objectively and ask yourself, is this really the intent? Because that's what that's doing, is ascribing intent, saying, I think they're doing X because. It doesn't mean that you're wrong, that you're seeing a behavior, but you're interpreting it as competition and backstabbing. Ask yourself, is there a different way to look at this? I always find that so empowering whenever I'm seeing something that I dislike or that's affecting me, is to ask myself, can I look at this a different way? Is there a different way to see this? And either way, I do recommend just sitting down with the person and having that transparent conversation and saying, I feel like there's some competition here and I'm not sure I understand where it's coming from. Can we talk about it? And can we find a different way of working together? You're taking your power back by doing that, right? Like, you're taking control of that situation, and that shows a lot of courage. It shows a lot of courage. It shows that you have your head in the right place. People really value when you can approach them and defuse the tension that has come up in some way. Because if you're experiencing that, there's definitely something on their side. It may not be what you think, but there's something, right? So you can go and sit down and just have that brave and open conversation and just be like, I may be wrong, but it kind of feels like this. What is happening? And if you approach it with that openness and with that vibe, they will really open up to you. I have done that and it's been hard. I'm not saying it's not hard, but I have done that. I have approached people who I hated because they were driving me crazy. And I was like, what is going on? I just feel like there's this tension and I don't understand it. And I have learned the most interesting things that way about myself, about them, about, what they're worried about. A lot of times people will really open up to you and they'll tell you, "Hey, I've had 2 failed projects and I can't afford a 3rd failed project," or "It really stresses me out when people do X and that's what you're reminding me of." But once you can get them to open up and you can hear them and genuinely listen and understand to what they're saying, you have so much power to repair a situation. And that's such a good part of your career story. Like, it fixes that situation, but that's also an amazing career story for you that you were able to do that. And a lot of times, some of the strongest work relationships come from resolving some sort of interpersonal conflict like that. And that can only work if it's not part of the culture, right? Again, that's when it's an individual situation and you've got an individual person that you think is behaving in this way. But if that doesn't work, or if it's systemic, then that's a problem. And if you've tried to resolve it yourself and the other person isn't opening up to you and they're not working to repair the relationship with you, at that point, you can ask your manager for advice. And this is very different from complaining. And I think that's a great thing for a lot of people to learn, is the difference between complaining to your manager and asking for advice. Because if you ask for advice, you're seen a certain way that is so much better than if they think you're complaining. So what you do in this kind of situation, if you have any interpersonal conflict, and I know we're talking about politics and competition and backstabbing, but I really want to talk about this specifically because interpersonal conflict happens so often at work. And this is something that, newer employees and some newer managers really struggle with how to resolve and understanding the expectation. So your manager is expecting that you're making some effort to resolve this on your own. And people hate complainers. And unfortunately, a lot of new career people who don't know the rules and don't have all these skills yet are seen as complaining when they don't know how to fix a situation. Does that make sense? That's not fair. You guys just don't have the skills if you're in that situation, if you're that new or early career. So what you do to fix that, to work around it, is you again ask your manager for advice. And you say, "Hey, I've been having this conflict with Sally, and I'm trying not to interpret it a certain type of way. I'm trying not to take it personally, but fundamentally, it's making my work a little bit harder." So I went and asked her, "What's going on? I'm seeing that this is happening. I'm feeling some tension." And she would just wasn't open to having that conversation. "Can you give me some advice on what else I can do?" Do you see the difference there? Like, you're taking control, you're taking your own power in that situation. But also what you've done is you've let your manager know. You have informed your manager you are in an interpersonal conflict. You've done it in a way where you're not complaining. You've demonstrated that you were proactive and tried to resolve it yourself. You've also shown that you've got good social skills because you approached it in a really healthy and constructive way. So your manager is likely to want to help you after that. Like, that is a really good thing to do. And when it comes to work politics, that is always one of my best tips, no matter which of these situations you're in. If you're in a situation where it's work politics and you think like it's affecting you, one of the best things you can do is demonstrate these strong social skills and then make sure you're having a constructive conversation with your manager so that they're aware, but also so that they are aware that you're doing the right things to try and correct it. They are more likely to try and help you behind the scenes. I'm gonna let that sink in for a second. They will help you behind the scenes. It may not always be overt. Like, sometimes what we want, like our sense of justice, is like, I want to see that person get fussed at. I want to know my manager is going to go fuss at them. It doesn't work like that. And so a lot of times I see people getting upset because they feel like they're not being listened to or their manager's not doing anything. So here's the next step of this. The one of the secrets is that your manager is often working on your behalf behind the scenes in ways that they can't and will not tell you. And so your manager is often like nudging the other person's manager. It's not always this overt, like, "Oh, I'm going to go in there and raise some heck," which again would feel great emotionally. That's not reality. And if it is reality, that actually means your manager is maybe not as experienced and mature as you need them to be. But a lot of times they'll be like, "Hey, leave this with me and I'll take care of it." And that's nice. And then people get frustrated because they don't see what their manager is doing, and then they lose trust in their manager. So what I'm saying is that you, more often than not, your manager is trying to help you. They're just, again, doing it behind the scenes in ways that they're not going to share with you. And that's a good thing, right? Because nobody wants drama. Like, they don't want drama, they don't want noise, and so they're gonna try and repair this situation the best way they know how, in the quietest way they know how, and that's one of the things that leaders at work dislike is noise, and unfortunately, a lot of, like, office politics, if you're trying to correct it or if you're frustrated with it, that is noise, and you don't wanna be adding any noise to the system. All right, so that is competition and backstabbing. I'm checking my notes over there from my wonderful conversation with my friend who helped me understand what it is that people are struggling with when it comes to office politics. So, do you have any questions about competition and backstabbing or anything else about how to talk to your manager before we go on to the next point on office politics? I'm gonna take a drink of water while I wait for questions in chat. All right. So, the next topic in office politics is miscommunication and hidden agendas. Miscommunications, I think, are a big pain point right now because we have so many generational shifts in the workforce and so many changing norms at work. And with the changes in remote work and technology and chat, just a lot of stuff is getting lost in translation these days. And it can be really frustrating for everybody, to be honest. So I would say that A lot of times, what I'm hearing is that people feel like their leaders aren't being clear, and the leaders are feeling like they're being the most direct they've ever been in their lives, and there's still a gap in the middle. There's still this big communication gap. That's such a bummer, and that's something that is a person where I have my own unique communication style. I had to work a lot on my communication when I entered the business world for a couple different reasons. One, I just wasn't socialized super well growing up. I think that's something relatable to a lot of people. I just wasn't. And I grew up in California and then entered my more serious professional career in Texas. And there was a huge cultural difference. And I was always the youngest person at work for about 10 to 15 years. I was always the youngest person in the group. I was usually the only woman because I was working in technology. So I had to deal with learning a lot about communication issues because I was trying to learn business lingo that I didn't understand. I wasn't a business major. I was psychology major. So I was like, it was like a whole new world of language for me. And I feel like that's what a lot of people are experiencing right now is coming into the workforce, the workplace, and it is a whole new language and it can be really off-putting. And then you also feel like nobody understands you. And like I said, I had the same thing. I was the youngest person. I was from California, working in Texas, totally different culturally. There were a couple things that I did, and then there's a couple other tips I have that are kinda some of these, like, insider secrets on how to deal with communication and remove miscommunication and communication gaps that I'm gonna share with you right now. So, one of the best things that you can do is I'm gonna go back to just honing those observational skills. So, I am a bit of like a nerdy spy when it comes to work and working in new contexts. So I had that experience of entering the corporate world and not understanding the lingo and having to learn it. And then also after I switched to consulting, like you're at a new client all the time and they have their own, company culture and so a lot of times their own language, and their own terminology. And every time as a consultant, you have to learn it really fast. And the way I did it and the way I coach a lot of consultants to do it is to just spend as much time as possible observing how everybody else is communicating with each other. And then behind the scenes in the background, asking about the words they're using because you have to learn the language of the place that you're going into and the leaders that you're working with, right? So, just even basic stuff where I'll be like, this is due on Friday. Well, so many people are going to think end of day Friday, and I mean Friday morning. And you're just, Gabby, that's on you. I know. I'm just using it as an example. Trust me, I would say Friday at 8 a.m. Okay. But when you're moving into different contexts like this, it's important to know if someone says Friday, what do they mean? And I love it when I have somebody who asks me clarifying questions. So there's some of it that you can learn observationally, like people have the same lingo in certain meetings. Like you've been invited to this developer meeting and everybody gives their update in this specific way. Then you want to give your update in that specific way. But a lot of times the miscommunication is, again, you're talking to leaders who think they're being clear and it's just not clear to you. And you can be doing all this observation in the background. But when you're new to a company, I always say take advantage of that newness because that wears off. You've got 3 months to ask the dumbest questions you can think of. You get a 3 month hall pass on asking dumb questions. You can ask everything and they will feel bad, right? They're not going to be upset with you. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, I totally should have explained that. And so you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm new. And I think that this probably does make sense, but I've never heard that term before. So what do you mean by X, right? I have worked with people who don't do that, even people very far along in their careers who just don't clarify and make weird assumptions. This one guy, poor guy, he was in his 40s and he was hired into a new role at a new company. And instead of asking us what all the acronyms were that we were using, that we try and explain all the time, we do, but we're human too. And we don't remember that people don't know all these acronyms. He was trying to Google things that were like internal company specific acronyms. The poor guy was like, wasting his time. And normally I would say, yeah, Google things, but that's what I'm saying. When it comes to lingo, do a quick Google search, but also ask internally because sometimes Google will lead you astray, or there's certain terms and acronyms that might mean something at one company, or there's an industry standard, and yet you'll be at this other company and they use that term completely differently. I see that all the time. So that's why I'm saying if you're in your first 3 months somewhere, use that to ask all the dumb questions. If you're after your 3 months, get a friend, get an ally and ask them in chat, oh my gosh, so and so just said blah, blah, blah. I want to make sure I understand what do they mean. And that's if you're in these big groups where everybody seems to understand it, you don't. But if you're getting direction from a manager or a leader in order to avoid these miscommunications, you have both a responsibility and an empowerment to ask them what they mean. What does done look like for you? When you say a report, what information for you is necessary for a report? Do you have an example of this? When you say Friday, is that morning, noon, or end of day? Close of business or end of day? Close of business might be 4, end of day is before you go to bed, right? So find out what that means. Don't be afraid to ask leaders questions. They expect them. And so this will help reduce a lot of the miscommunication that you may be thinking is part of office politics. It's not intentional. I cannot emphasize enough that it is so rarely about you. It's about the fact that everybody's overworked and they just don't have time to be as clear as you'd like them to be. And they don't remember what it's like to not know. And that is one of the biggest struggles of being more senior in your career is you genuinely don't remember what it's like. You think you do. Like I have horror stories from early in my career. And yet when it came to this office politics question, I had to ask my friend because I didn't remember until she told me. I hope that helps. And that's the miscommunication part. The hidden agendas, I don't know. This is one where I'm just going to go back to the best thing you can do is to get a really thick skin, just really thick skin. And what I mean by that is I don't assume anything about other people. I don't assume why they're doing something. So if you think someone has a hidden agenda, let's take a step back, right? Like you're like, oh, Gabby, they have this hidden agenda. They're doing X. Okay. They're doing X is true. Why they're doing X is your interpretation. So I rarely assume people have hidden agendas. I'm going to be really blunt right now. If someone does something, I usually just assume that they're dumb or that they don't know better. Probably shouldn't say that. I assume that they didn't communicate it well. I assume that they were, let's just say, distracted, didn't do the best job telling me the thing or whatever. But again, assuming hidden agendas, like that is a stretch. And most people are just too busy to care. And that is in general in the corporate world. Now, in some situations, it was really interesting. I was talking to a really close friend of mine, and she was giving me some examples of some of this that she's dealing with at her job. And she works in education, she works in academia. That is its own cultural beast. So I worked on campus in the dean's office at my university. Sorry, I have a little cat here. And yeah, that is a whole different world. If you work in education and academia, yes, there is tons of backstabbing. There is tons of people all up in each other's business. There's tons of people jockeying for position by doing weird things, So you kind of have to know what's normal for the industry I'm in. Like in any other workplace, I'm like, that's super toxic. In academia, that's normal. I don't choose to work in academia anymore because that's normal for that area of work. Hidden agendas are the same thing. So that can be a sign of a toxic workplace. But more often than not, when I see someone assuming someone else has a hidden agenda, I'm like, probably not. Like, you are right about the behavior you're observing. But if I were you, I would go ask them why they do that. Like, whatever it is, I would go ask them, hey, I noticed that you left me off this meeting. I noticed that you did this. And just ask them why. Don't assume you know why. And that was one of the biggest lessons I learned from one of my career coaches was, Gabby, you think you know, and you need to ask more. You need to ask more why. You think you know why people do things. You need to ask them. And that was true. I did. And then I say the same thing to everybody else. Like, just go ask them. Most of the time, I'm going to use a different example. There have been so many times where I've accidentally left people off a meeting and they could easily interpret that I had this hidden agenda to exclude them so they could fail, because I legitimately hear people saying that so-and-so leaves me off meeting invitations so that I'm going to fail or I can't succeed at blah, blah, blah. Okay, either your calendar sucks, that's a reason I leave people off of meetings, or I'll invite them when they can't go. It's not that I have hidden agenda. I'm like tired of dealing with their calendar. So I'm like, okay. So whatever you're observing that makes you think someone has a hidden agenda, I'm telling you, there's usually 90 reasons that they have for doing that. They may not be good reasons, but it does not mean they have a hidden agenda. Sometimes I leave people off meetings because I forget they exist. I know that's terrible, but it's true. That's not a hidden agenda. Sometimes that person doesn't have good input. Sometimes they're disruptive in the meeting. And sometimes I'm too busy to give them feedback, or they work for a client and I can't give them that feedback. So if you're that person where you're like, I'm being left off of meetings or they don't include me in the emails about yada, yada, don't make assumptions, go ask. That's my thing. And then if you do happen to be working in an industry where that's common, like academia, decide if you can live with it or not. Right? Everything's a decision. Just you have to know, is that normal for that company? And if you are in a place where that's normal, I have to say, I have seen this in one company outside academia where there was just a very small group of people within the company, but enough that they did this that it actually created and set a culture, even though it was only a handful of people doing it. It was at actually 2 different client companies. I've seen an entire group that was kind of poisoned by these bad apples who did that. Don't work with them. Like, leave the group, switch companies if you can. Like, if that is becoming part of the culture, you can only win by leaving, because they will drag you down in the mud with them if it's more than one person who's behaving like this. So again, it's kind of like the example I was talking about earlier with, the competition and backstabbing. It's the same thing with hidden agendas. If you think people have it, you have to ask yourself, is that something that I think is happening just with me? Or do I think multiple people are doing that with multiple other people? Then you can know if it's a cultural issue, an interpersonal issue, or just an assumption on your part. And then you decide to go or talk to them or whatever. But you have to figure it out so you know which action to take. All right. So that is miscommunication and hidden agendas. We're talking about office politics and how to deal with them. And so we're going through all the different things that you can experience with office politics. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Thank you for joining. The next one is decision-making transparency. And I'm making this face because I've been accused of this a lot. And I have a lot of experience on both sides of the table. So apparently, and again, for those of you who weren't with us earlier, I was struggling with, people ask a lot about how to deal with office politics. I'm like, what situations are they dealing with? And my friend helped me understand like some of these kind of nuances. Because again, my advice is normally just, if you think there's politics, stay far away from it. But decision-making transparency, this is where people feel like their leaders aren't being transparent with them about decisions that are being made, why decisions are being made, or they feel like they're not being included in those decisions, right? That sucks. And that hurts too, especially if when you join the company, you're kind of getting gassed up a little bit. They're so excited you're joining. You have such an important role. They've been looking for a person like you for so long. Like, sometimes when you join a company, they really do gas you up. And so then you kind of join thinking, I'm so important, And I've, like I said, been on both sides of the table in this one, where there have been decisions I've been left out of where I certainly thought I should have been involved. And as a leader, I have had people be very frustrated with me because I didn't include them in decisions. Decision-making hierarchies at work. I'm going to kind of give you a few tips on this one. The first one is, absolutely, you need to understand the decision-making hierarchy at your company. What I mean by that is, who actually is able to make what decisions and what levels are normally included in discussions about that decision, because it's usually not who you think. And I say this all the time when I talk about, I'm going to say raises and promotions for a second. And you're going to be like, Gabby, I don't think I should be involved in that. But I'm going to tell you a secret. So most companies, the directors aren't the ones who get to decide the raise amounts. Those decisions are made way above your boss's level. And so if you think about that from a trickle down perspective, like, people aren't involved in the decisions you think they're involved in. And that really got to me because, you get promoted to manager and you're like, awesome, I get to make hiring and firing decisions. No, you don't. Your director does. And then you make it to director and you're like, awesome. I get, I have an entire business unit I'm responsible for. They've told me I'm responsible for it. That must mean I get to set the budget. No, you don't. Sometimes you can ask for money, but you have no decision making power about getting it. And sometimes you don't have decision making power about spending it. And in some companies, directors also can't fire people. I'm not saying you want to fire people. I mean, nobody enjoys doing that, but just these are decision making things. Decision making around money and employment is usually highly restricted and highly monitored. And if you think about it that way, then even the smaller decisions that can impact those things are more restricted than you think they are. And it might be something simple like who gets which project assignment or things like that. Reorgs, like it can be really frustrating. One of my biggest frustrations is when people are actually dishonest about valuing your opinion. I think that's worse because I've worked at a lot of companies where they'll pull leader adjacent people into a room and get their input on something. And it's fake. It's just completely fake. It's to make you feel like you have a say in something that you have zero input on. And so I'm not trying to say you shouldn't be upset about it, but I frankly think dishonesty is worse. I think it's worse to make people think that they have input when they don't. It's a waste of time. And once I realized that, because I worked for a lot of companies that were very nice on the surface, right? And they would do that. They'd say, "Oh, we want people to feel good about these decisions." No, they don't. They want you to not make trouble. So they're trying to make you feel better about it so you don't. So, yeah, you're not going to be included in the decisions you think you are. And even when you're included, you might just be an informed. So, if you guys haven't heard of a RACI is a term that's used in the project world, but is also really, really helpful in understanding decision making hierarchies and leadership hierarchies. Because even if they don't use the same terminology, the reality is the same, which is that you are either responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed in the decision. Some people even use different versions of this terminology. But the point is that a lot of times you think you should be consulted when you're barely an informed. And that is a harsh reality. But when I say an informed, that means someone tells you and you're expected to go along with it. When I say you're consulted, that means someone gets your input, but you're not a decision maker. You don't get a vote. Like they're just getting your input. And most of the time when someone is consulted in a decision making process, that's not real input anyway. Like I said, they're just trying to make you feel better and feel like that you've got a voice. And they'll say that we want to hear your voice. We want to hear what you have to say. And they don't. Like, they've already made the decision. By the time they're socializing it like that, the decision's been made. So it can be frustrating. And like I said, being on the other side of the table, I probably as a leader have erred on the side of not fake consulting people because I, coming up in my career, thought it was so dishonest once I realized what they were doing. And I kind of vowed I'm never going to do that to people. Like, I'm not going to get someone's input if I'm not actually going to listen to it or if I've already made the decision. And when I talk about like the game, that's part of the game. That's part of the game leaders play. And I do have to say, apparently it is better to be dishonest about it because when leaders do it, it does lead to higher employee satisfaction because most of those employees don't realize how dishonest it is and that their input is not actually counting for anything and that it's just a complete waste of fucking time. Sorry for the F word. But I'm like, hey, we're busy. Don't ask for my input on something if it's not going to go anywhere. And as a leader, that was something I took to heart. But I will say, if you want to be involved in leadership decisions, one of the best things to do is to approach your manager and say, I would love to better understand how these decisions get made. I'd love to have better visibility into the decision-making process at this company. That's such a good way to frame it because you're not challenging the decision itself and be very clear that you're not. And you're not saying, I should have been involved. You don't want to come across as entitled. Nobody wants that. And like we talked about earlier, you don't want to be perceived as a complainer. So again, saying, I'd love to better understand the decision-making process at this company because I enjoy working here. I want to be here for a long time. Eventually, I'd love to be in a leadership role. Oh my gosh, that will do a lot for you. All right, decision-making transparency. I guess the other aspect of this is feeling like they haven't been transparent about a decision. That's the worst. I have seen people, and I'm going to talk about promotions again because I often do. I've seen people who thought they were up for promotion and they were never on the list. They were never being considered. I've seen people who thought they were getting promoted and found out when the emails went out about promotions because their manager never told them that they weren't. That kind of lack of transparency, you have every right to challenge. And there's certain things that managers are supposed to do and take seriously, and career development is one of them. And so if you're in a situation where you thought you were up for promotion and your manager was not transparent with you about the process or about where you were in the process or about their support for you in the process, you get to complain about that. You get to fuss at your manager. And I absolutely would. I wouldn't fuss too hard, but I would say, "Hey, I feel not good. I feel icky about this because I did think I was up for promotion, and I would have thought you would have told me I didn't get it before I found out publicly." It's a hard thing to say, and it's hard not to get emotional when you say it. That's one of the times you privately do get to be emotional because that is not right. And so that kind of lack of transparency is unjust, and I would challenge it. And complaining to HR doesn't get you anywhere 9 times out of 10. I just say, "Don't bother with HR, you're just gonna piss everybody off," and sometimes they look for reasons to get rid of you if you've complained about anything. But if you're ever in a conversation with HR after something like that happens, just be like, "Hey, I wanna better understand the promotion process because I thought I was in it and I wasn't." You're not complaining, you're asking a question, right? Asking questions is a great way to indirectly complain without being labeled a complainer. And then HR then understands your manager kind of effed up. I've seen a lot of managers get fussed at. Managers, directors. I'm not saying manager level. Saying like people manager, like whatever leadership level that is, it's above you. I've seen a lot of them get fussed at because they have not been transparent about promotions. Like that is actually taken pretty seriously. All right. How are we doing on office politics? If you are still with us, I'd love to know if there's just more about office politics that you've got questions about. I would love to know if there's other things you're struggling with office politics, or if there's any of my answers that are unclear, or that you're like, please tell me more about these different aspects of politics, or you're dealing with something that I didn't cover, because this is something I really want to help people with. It can be very confusing to navigate. And there are a lot of unspoken rules at work. And the whole point of me being here and helping to talk about it is to share with you the things that people don't say out loud. So if you have any questions about office politics or anything else, drop them into chat. And take a quick drink of water and see if you guys have any questions. And again, my name is Gabby. I'm with She Makes It Work, and I have been working full-time professionally for 30 years. I'd say I've been in serious leadership roles for about 25 of those years. I've coached a lot of people. I've promoted a lot of people. I've also been through a lot of it myself. And so I am 100% here to help you understand all the confusing or weird or frustrating parts of working in the business and corporate world. And that includes just if you're struggling with something and you're not sure how to handle it, pop that question in the chat, because that is what I wish I'd had in my career, is that unbiased person to answer my question or tell me if I'm wrong or what am I missing. That was something I asked myself all the time in my career. What am I missing? How is this making sense to everybody else but me? And I feel like a lot of people feel that way. And this really kind of touched my heart when I did the video on, why is Gen Z suddenly starting to get fired? Because we saw the layoffs with millennials and Gen X, and then Gen Z was doing well. And then suddenly people were not experiencing that. And people were saying they don't know what they're doing wrong. All right, we've got a question in chat. Who do I reach out to if I want to ask about the promotion I didn't get? The first thing you should do is 100% talk to your manager, like the direct supervisor above you, and let them know, I thought I was in line for this promotion. Can you help me understand what happened? And that leaves it pretty open-ended. You're not being accusatory, you're not fussing at them yet. You're just really being open-ended, because I do think it's important to know, why didn't I get it? Or if I wasn't considered, why was I not considered for that promotion? And make sure you do that in a dedicated setting. And so the best way to do that is to set up time with that manager. Make sure you do it in a one-on-one. Don't grab them in the hallway or out in the parking lot. Like set up dedicated time with them and just ask them, I'd love to know what happened with that promotion. Tell me more. Oh, I wasn't considered for it. What should I be doing that I'm not doing? Or what does that look like? Those are great open-ended questions to ask. And you might find out that there were certain things you needed to do from a process perspective, or you might find out that there were certain things you needed to do developmentally. If they give you real answers like that, I would suggest that you listen and really listen with an open mind. And if you're feeling a type of way about it, write it down and come back and ask them more later, or ask them more then if you're in a good mindset for that conversation. And hopefully your manager will open up in that conversation. If they give you blow off answers, though, I would definitely ask them later, give it some time to breathe, and then come back and ask them, I'd like to better understand the process and what I need to be doing to be part of this process. And then if they blow you off again, that means they don't consider you promotable, but they don't have the courage to tell you. And then you know, and then you know what to do because I'm always going to tell you leave. Awesome. Thank you so much for the question, Amy Kate. That was a great question. And thanks for confirming that I answered it. That makes me so happy. Does anybody else have questions about the promotions or politics? I get so many questions from people about the promotion process because I feel like in a lot of companies, it's just not transparent. I've worked for some companies where it was very transparent, but sometimes what they said about the process also wasn't true. So that happens as well. So let me know if you guys have any more questions about promotions or office politics, because it can be so confusing. And like I said, I always wish I had somebody to ask. So I'm that person for y'all. That's why I'm here. All right, everybody, thank you so much. We've gone for an hour. And for those of you that have joined and are still here, thank you so much for joining. This is our first live stream for She Makes It Work. I'm so excited. I thought it went really well. If you guys want to send me private feedback, please do so. Otherwise, I'm actually going to go live a little bit later this afternoon and talk about all the things our leaders are failing us on these days, which is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So thank you again, everybody. Hopefully I'll see you all in the next one and have a great weekend.